Hello, I'm very happy to have been given this opportunity to interact with you. I shall be speaking on underrepresentation in STEM and especially on unconscious bias, how this can explain the problem of underrepresentation of women in STEM. Let me introduce myself. I'm Professor Ranjana Prakash, Physics Department, University of Allahabad, Allahabad. Most people continue to associate science and maths with men and humanity and arts field with women. Individuals who actively and forcefully reject these notions about stereotypes still tend to be guided by these deeply embedded perceptions which are pervasive also and can manifest from an early age. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. Residing deep in the subconscious, these biases are different from known biases that individuals may choose to conceal for the purpose of social correctness. Gender development studies reveal the early emergence of children's knowledge of the link between gender and various qualities and activities. These classifications contribute to subconscious associations, how we think about activities linked with boys and girls, leading to strong gender bias. This unconscious gender bias must be addressed. As you can see in this slide, boys are associated with mechanical tools, while girls are using combs, bangles, mirrors, perfumes, etc. Children appear to act as though boys have higher status, write gender development authors Irwin et al., citing research about gender and peer. They showed that even at elementary schools, boys are less willing to allow girls into their peer groups than girls to allow boys into theirs. These trends, researchers say, are consistent with boys having a higher status than girls even as children. Later in life, these early biases persist. You can see the girl hanging on a thin rope and the boy walking on the tightrope. A review of more than 2.5 implicit association tests showed that people implicitly associate men with science and career and women with liberal arts and family. The findings also challenge the notion that bias against women in maths and science is a thing of the past. Implicit biases against women in science may prevent girls and women from pursuing science from the beginning. This leads to the engagement gap where the early STEM grades and teacher encouragement have a great impact on the enrollment of boys and girls in STEM degrees. You can see the graph for the boys going up after the STEM grades starting. The boys and the girls have the same grade, but the teacher encouragement, how this encourages the boys' graph to go up. Play a role in evaluation of girls and women's coursework in STEM subjects, influence parents' decision to encourage or discourage their daughters from pursuing science and engineering careers, influence employers' hiring decisions and evaluation of female employees. Implicit biases or unconscious biases come from the culture and are a thumbprint of the culture on our minds. What is unconscious bias? We all have shortcuts or schemas that help us make sense of this world, but our shortcuts sometimes make us misinterpret things. This is known as unconscious bias. Human beings must have the ability to differentiate between two things very quickly, some things which are innate and some things which we teach ourselves and wish to be associated with. Banerjee, a key researcher, pointed out that unconscious beliefs can be changed if the holder of the belief so desires. Unconscious bias and the impact of women entering in science. Project Implicit, a study carried out at Yale University, looks at many of the places in which unconscious bias lurks and tests the association one makes. In terms of the underlying assumptions people make about science, 26% of people taking the test have been shown to have strong association of male gender and science, and 28% a moderate association. Practically no one operates the other way around, associating women more strongly with science than men. In itself, it does not matter, but it does if the preconception starts spilling out. Unconscious biases are universal. Unconscious biases are a fact of life. We all harbor them and take them to our workplace. Unconscious biases in the workplace affect recruiting, retention, can neglect talent, spoil performance reviews. It affects who is hired or promoted. Unknowingly and unwittingly, it shapes or undermines an organization's culture. Unconscious bias permeates the workplace at all levels, since we all have our prejudices. Various studies confirm that people harbor unconscious bias even though they explicitly believe that prejudice and discrimination are wrong. Biases can be based on skin, color, gender, age, height, weight, competence, likability, hireability, employability, etc. These biases cause us to make decisions in favor of one group to the detriment of the others. To cite some examples, some studies found that mature-faced people had a career advantage over baby-faced people. Yale University studies found that male and female scientists trained to reject the applicants on subjective basis were more likely to hire men, rank them higher in competency, and pay them more than the women. Tall men in business may find unconscious bias to work in their favors. To cite, 58% of Fortune 500 CEOs are just a little less than 6 feet. Tall men tend to move into leadership positions far more frequently. Studies will show that people earn more than the shorter people. And so what managers do, they would just joke and say, let us measure the height and give them the promotion to this particular status. So where does the woman go? She is small in height. Liz Dolan, CMO of Fox International Channels, recently opted out of board positions because of unconscious bias. Her other board members were all male. The way she put it, she learned that even when a woman earns a seat at the table, the men can isolate and put you in a soundproof booth. In simple words, not ready to listen to your point of view. Bias is rooted in the brain, as this diagram shows. Unconscious bias exists because bias is rooted in the brain. Scientists determined that bias is found in the same region associated with fear and threat. Bias is also found in other areas of the brain. Stereotyping, another form of bias, is associated with temporal and frontal lobes. The left temporal lobe of the brain stores general information about people and objects and is the storage place for social stereotypes. The frontal cortex is associated with forming impressions of others. Our brain has evolved in such a manner as to group things, images and messages together so as to make sense of the world. The brain categorizes all information it is bombarded with and tags that information with categories it can sort out into. Bias occurs when these categories are tagged with good or bad and then applied to the entire group. From a survival point of view, this mental grouping into good or bad, safe or not safe, appropriate or inappropriate, helped the brain to make quick decisions. This developed a survival mechanism, and this survival mechanism is hardwired into our brain. It makes it very difficult to eliminate or minimize the original thought. There is hope, however, that this hardwired unconscious brain bias can be reversed. An example cited often, how support levels for lesbians have changed between 2006 and 2013. Types of unconscious bias. The task of addressing and rooting out nearly 150 identified unconscious biases is really daunting. For many organizations, identifying and eliminating the unconscious biases has become a high priority. According to Wall Street Journal, 20% of large US companies are now providing unconscious bias training to their employees. Like this cartoon says, the girl is bewildered. How can I address my biases if I don't know even that I have them? Types of unconscious bias. A few of unconscious biases that directly impact the workplace. Affinity bias, the tendency to warm up to people like ourselves. Halo bias, the tendency to think everything about a person is good because you like that person. Perception bias, the tendency to form stereotypes and assumptions about certain groups that make impossible to make objective judgments about members of those groups. Groupthink. This bias occurs when people try too hard to fit into a particular group, holding back their own thoughts and opinions. This causes them to lose part of their identity and causes organizations to lose out on creativity and innovation. Confirmation bias. The tendency for people to seek information that confirms pre-existing beliefs, like this lady who is performing an experiment. She has come out with this, that her formula is perfect, this experiment is confirming it. How to uncover and minimize unconscious bias in the workplace. HR and talent management professionals can help to combat this unconscious bias and its effects by following certain measures. Offering awareness training. The first step to address unconscious biases in the workplace is to acknowledge that everyone has them, and awareness of these biases can be achieved by offering training. Awareness training at their workplace is a safe place to learn about unconscious bias, how to recognize their own biases, and how to be mindful about combating them in everyday decision making. Google did this by offering a video workshop to all its employees. Look out for capable, employable candidates who find it very difficult to trumpet their own accomplishments. Studies say that men are better at selling their accomplishments. Labeling the type of bias that are likely to occur creates structures of layered screening. Trying separately to address women, especially women suffering from imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome describes a situation where someone feels they are acting like an imposter or fraud because they think that they have duped other people around them in believing that their accomplishments are of high caliber. Now, what others think of you, reality is what I know. This has been compared in this slide. The implicit association test. The online implicit association test, a result of collaboration among psychologists from Harvard, University of Virginia, University of Washington, was designed to help test takers assess their unconscious biases. Since it was launched in 1998, more than 6 million people have taken the test. For the gender science, IIT participants who take the test anonymously complete 2 rounds of categorization. In each round, participants are asked to categorize 16 randomly ordered words, 8 representing either male, example boy, son, or female, example daughter, girl, and 8 representing either science, example physics, engineering, or arts, example history, English. In one round, participants used one key to indicate words representing male or science and another key to indicate female or arts. In the second round, the pairings are switched and participants hit one response key to indicate if a word represents female or science. The participants' response times for both rounds is measured. The average response time when science is paired with male is compared with the average response time when science is paired with female. These findings indicate a strong implicit association of male with science and female with arts and high level of gender stereotyping at the unconscious level among both women and men of all races and ethnicities. These findings also challenge the notion that bias against women in maths and science is a thing of the past. Another very interesting result of experiment carried out by Banerjee is recounted here. Jacobi et al. Found that when individuals were shown random names such as Sebastian Weisskopf from a phone book, a few days later these participants were likely to identify that name as the name of a famous person from a list of both famous and unknown persons. Banaji explains this by concluding, memory works in odd ways. Some things that we have seen lingers in our mind, and sometimes we use this information to make our decisions incorrectly. She wondered if the same thing could happen with female names and replicated this experiment using the name Sally Weisskopf among Sebastian Weisskopf. Surprisingly, Banaji found that people were less likely to identify Sally as famous, even though both Sally and Sebastian were unknown. Based on these findings, Banaji concluded that people must unconsciously associate male and fame more readily than female and fame. When asked if gender had anything to do with their choice, study participants declined, indicating they were not conscious of these biases. Banaji explains that these unconscious beliefs can help explain how good people end up unintentionally making decisions that violate even their own sense of what is correct and what is good. Results of these experiments are important and reveal implicit biases against women in science and may prevent girls and women from pursuing science from the beginning. How to eliminate the unconscious bias? Although implicit biases operate at an unconscious level and are influenced by our cultural environment, Banaji believes that such biases can be changed if the holder of the belief so desires. Different implicit biases in the workplace. Be aware of different implicit biases which are working in the workplace. The halo bias, the tendency to only see the good about a person because of personal affinity. Perception bias, the tendency to form stereotypes about certain groups, makes it impossible to make an objective judgment of these groups. The affinity bias is a tendency to warm up to people like ourselves. This tendency can harm or help employee groups. The affinity bias may harm or help organizational image and communication. By bringing these biases to conscious levels, HRs, policymakers and recruiters will become more aware about how these biases affect their decision making, hiring process, etc. Creation of structures to deal with unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is the result of the brain's lightning speed to take in, tag, to sort out and to store information. To slow the brain's quick decision-making process, HRs and talent management professionals can, in conjunction with their senior leaders, managers, CEOs, create structures for activities like decision-making, resume screening and interview formatting, hiring, promoting and firing of employees. These structures will allow for more collective, deliberative actions, also give peers ample opportunity to point out times when unconscious bias may be creeping in. To disable functioning of your unconscious bias. Some organizations have started to strip identifying information from resumes to allow for more unbiased screening process. Other organizations have started using standardized interview questions to minimize bias and to allow all applicants to be reviewed more fairly. Howard Ross, founder and chief of the consulting firm Cook Ross, suggests that employers should review every aspect of the employment cycle for hidden biases. These processes should be taken up for resume screening, interviews, mentoring programs, performance evaluations, identification of high performers, promotions and terminations. If unconscious bias has crept in at any point, review the existing process so that bias is minimized. Conduct employee surveys to understand what specific issues of hidden bias and unfairness might exist in the organization. Contact former employees to learn what issues they faced which were impediment in their progress. Talk with current employees, particularly women and minorities, to find out which unconscious biases they have witnessed. The structure or process introduced to address unconscious bias will be unique to each organization. HR and talent management professionals can make positive contribution to their workplace by rooting out any and minimizing the unconscious biases. If unconscious bias has crept in at any point, review the existing process and alter them so that bias is minimized. Raise awareness of implicit biases. The main purpose of the implicit association test on gender and science is to help educate individuals about their implicit biases. Although implicit biases operate at an unconscious level and are influenced by our cultural environment, individuals can resolve to become more aware of their biases whenever decision making is involved. Anyone can take the IAT test, and the site is mentioned. He will get a better understanding of the biases. Educators too can look at the effect their biases have on their teaching, advising and evaluation of students, and can work for an environment in the classroom that counters gender science stereotypes. Parents too should resolve to be more aware of messages they convey to their sons and daughters about their suitability for maths and science. Suggestions to consciously combat the unconscious bias. Give your individual attention. When you are evaluating candidates, you are more likely to lean on certain biases. If you are distracted, rushed or tired, review applicants when you can achieve your optimum mental focus. Give yourself plenty of time. Be consistent. Biases can affect your expectations of candidates from different groups, which can manifest unconsciously when evaluating men and women by different standards. When making such evaluations, be sure that biases related to gender equality and gender equity are taken care of. Create an evaluation form that lists the traits you are looking for and how each applicant rates. As you are doing through the applications, write both highlights and reservations for each candidate and be able to explain to yourself your reasoning for considering or rejecting a candidate. Also, because a person's name can reveal information about their identity that could lead to bias such as gender, race, ethnicity, consider blinding yourself in the initial screening. Identify the expectations you have that are based on stereotypes and replace them with positive examples that contradict them. If you find yourself automatically assuming that girls perform poorly in maths, take some time to recall names of some female maths professors. I'm not telling women to be like men. I'm telling us to evaluate what men and women do in the workforce and at home without the influence of gender bias, stereotypes, especially the implicit biases. Change can be slow, but it can happen. We just need to start. Thank you.